Bill, thank you so much for joining us today at this session. I'm Ed, and I'm an academic researcher based at the University of Cambridge. I'm also one of the co-conveners of the Social Power and Mental Health Conference. The conference has been produced in collaboration with a number of local organisations, including CPFT NHS Trust, Lifecraft, and QTI Coalition of Colour. But all of the thinking, the planning, and the creative have been done by our steering group. The steering group is made up of local researchers, campaigners, and activists with first-hand experience of mental distress, the psychiatric system, or both. Each session of the conference is going to be chaired by a member of the steering group. And for today's session on activism and hope, I'm really delighted to welcome Camise, who is going to be our chair. So, Camise, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Camise Rouvier, and I'm a mature PhD student researcher in Department of Psychiatry here at the University of Cambridge. I also have lived experience with ADHD and depression. Now it's time to introduce tonight's speaker. Before that, I want to give a brief content warning for today's session. There will be references to mental illness and mental distress throughout, and there may also be references to other potentially distressing issues. For people who are joining from the UK, a list of organizations that can offer support if you become distressed can be found at bbc.co.uk/action line.
So I'm just very quickly going to just invite our four speakers for this afternoon to give a brief verbal description of themselves. So the first speaker today is going to be Samuel Hosking. So Samuel, can I pass over to you?
Hi, I'm Samuel. I am an employee with an organization called Lifecraft, who provide a variety of mental health support services. And I'm also a person with lived experiences of a variety of mental health conditions. But although I'm an employee with that organization, I'm speaking in my own personal capacity.
Thanks very much. Kira, would you be able to give a brief verbal description of yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kira. I'm currently a PhD student at Kent University. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm also working at SOAS with a team of anthropologists who are looking at open dialogue in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Liz, would you be able to give a brief description of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ed. I'm Liz. I run my own charity, which is all about mental health and wellbeing. We offer coaching, mentoring, training, and holistic therapies, all about helping and supporting children and adults.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. So, Samuel, I think you're due to be our first speaker. So I'll just pop you onto the spotlight and then hand over to you.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about some things that happened what is now about 2-ish years ago at Lifecraft, which, as I said, is a charity that I work for. And so in 2019, there was a recommissioning of mental health and community services by Cambridgeshire County Council, and they put out something called a tender to contract, which basically means they wanted different organisations to bid to take on those services. And as part of that tender that was put out, was included kind of taking on the services that were at that time being provided, or some of the services that were at that time being provided by Lifecraft. And so the decision was made by the county council that they would do this tendering as a county-wide commission. And so they wanted one organisation to take on all of the services across the county. And it simply wasn't possible for Lifecraft as an organisation to bid on that basis, because there, as a local charity, there was simply not the capacity to provide a county-wide service. There And so after a few different attempts at different ways to get around this by looking at whether we could or whether LifeCraft could partner with a larger organization, ultimately we were not successful. We were not able to find a way to be part of that tender, and so we lost a considerable amount of the funding that was used to fund the support groups that we put on. We still had some money from the council for specific purposes, but we lost the money they were providing specifically for that service to run those groups, and that, which is that particular kind of funding for those who deal in technical jargon, is the membership money. And so from that position, we had to cut back the number of groups we could put on. And we had to really stretch, or LifeCraft really stretched. I keep saying we because I am an employee there, but LifeCraft really stretched the funding. But even really stretching the funding, LifeCraft was only able to keep about half of its groups going, something like that, with one of which being a Hearing Voices network group, which was then taken on by Minds as one of their groups and is now run under the Mind umbrella. And then so that's kind of left us in this position where we'd lost an awful lot of the services we were providing, and the members were finding out themselves without services that they really relied upon, and there not being anything there immediately to replace them. So that there was this kind of, I guess, kind of lag period is the best term I've come up with to describe it, where LifeCraft had to end a lot of its services, but Minds had not got its new services up and running. And even some of the services that we were able to keep going, actually for the kind of initial period, because funding was so stretched, we weren't really sure as members. I am incidentally both a member and an employee of LifeCraft. I should have pointed that out at the beginning. We weren't sure whether the groups were going to be there from week to week. We would come in each week and not know if we were going to be able to come back in the next week. And then with a bit of time, we kind of found some new bits of funding, and so then we were went from being we weren't sure whether we were coming back in week to week to not being sure whether we were coming back in month to month. And then over time, as we then got things stabilized eventually, and Minds did bring forward some new services, some new groups, although ones I think the members would have said were not necessarily replacements for the groups that we'd lost. They were a new kind of service, and a new kind of service that wasn't necessarily suitable for everyone who had been relying on the old service. And so there were still a lot of people who were finding themselves lacking a service they'd really relied upon. And then that kind of brings us into 2020, and I was watching the news one morning and hearing about this kind of new coronavirus that was appearing, and then everyone knows obviously that what happened with that. But then obviously when lockdown came in, we had to shut down all of our services pretty much, and were left. And then we were kind of left scrambling to try and get together something online, and emails were sent and phone calls were had, and we've now obviously got Zoom groups going, which has meant that we've actually found ourselves with even less groups, and it's been a very difficult thing to go into off the back of those funding cuts. During that time, though, we have found new sources of funding, and so we are in a better but still very stretched and very uncertain position for the next 3 years, and then after that we don't know what happens after that. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves now. That's kind of brings us up to today. And this is a kind of an experience over the last 2 years that has been very difficult for a lot of LifeCraft members. There's been a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I think for a lot of people, a real sense of loss, a real sense of not having the thing that they really relied on, and having lost it very suddenly, very without warning, and suddenly finding themselves not knowing what to do because it's just this thing they rely on is just gone very suddenly. And there's a real sense of, or there was at the time a real sense of, what do we do? And a real sense of powerlessness. And to be blunt, a real sense of not being listened to, of this decision being made without us even knowing it was being made, let alone us being consulted on it. And that's been very difficult for the membership. And I think there are some lessons to be learned from that experience, because I think I'm not wanting to point fingers or blame any organization or any individual, but I think there are things that could have been done differently that would have made this a process that wouldn't have caused the same problems. I'm not going to comment on whether it was the right decision or not to have one organization providing all of the services across Cambridgeshire in that way. I've heard good arguments on both sides of that debate. But if you're in moving the service over, actually there are ways it could have been done differently that would have made it a much less difficult process for the people, for service users. And so I think there are a few things that I think, lessons that can be learned on an individual level and on an organization level. I think some lessons for organizations are, there is a real need for small organizations like LifeCraft to have more varied funding than they often do, and certainly more varied funding than LifeCraft did. There was, I think, being so reliant on the funding from the council put us in a very difficult position. And if we had not been so reliant on the council, if we'd had other sources of funding, then we would have been in a better position when the council moved that funding. And I think there was a real need for some more planning. I think for those who are working in these kind of organizations, I think something I suggest is there's a real need to have a plan for what you do if your biggest source of funding does just disappear like that, is moved to somewhere else, or is cut, or whatever, if it's not there anymore. Particularly when that source of funding is something like the county council that does regular reviews of its funding. And it is actually, I think, worth thinking about, and this is potentially a question for some of the academics in the room to have a think about, is whether it is actually wise for charities like LifeCraft to be having council funding, government funding, when that funding can be withdrawn in that way, and where you are kind of having to have these regular reviews in which you could just lose that funding. And that is a question that needs to be thought about. On an individual level, for kind of, to an extent, individual service users, but also for organizations themselves to think about, is I think one of the difficulties is actually that we, as members, we did not know how to navigate the political systems that were making these decisions. And we had real difficulty figuring out, how do we make our voice heard in this system? And unfortunately, there is a problem that people with mental health conditions, on average, do not have as much engagement with these systems as the average person does. And so I think some things we need to think about as organizations and as individuals is getting more involved in those systems, getting people, service users, to vote, I would encourage you, if you are someone with a mental health condition, please, there are elections coming up, please go out and vote, because actually, and no matter who you vote for, please vote, because the people who vote are the people who are going to be most listened to. That is just the nature of elections. There is probably not much that can be done about the fact that is just the nature of an election. And actually, if we all go out and vote, I think probably politicians will think about these issues differently, because that's the nature of elected office. Is you listen to the people who vote, and if you don't listen to the people who vote, then someone who does listen to them gets more votes than you and replaces you. And so I think getting people out to vote and organizations encouraging their members to vote, I think, is something we should look at. Equally, trying to help service users know who they can email if they're not happy with the decision that is being made about funding for services. I didn't know who would be the right person to email. The members in Lifecraft I talked to didn't know who the right person to email, who was, to express the fact that we weren't happy with this decision, and helping service users to have some understanding of that, I think, would make a difference. Because I don't think the council actually may not even know that we as members are not happy, because I don't know that any of us knew how to get in contact with them to tell them that. And I think maybe we need to look at whether there can be events where politicians can come in and talk to service users about these things. Maybe we should have a hustings in an organization like Lifecraft when there's the next general election. That might be something that might make a difference. There are some ideas to be looked at here, and that's maybe something, again, for the academics here to have a look at and say, well, can we look at how we might improve these kinds of engagements? I think we also need to look at, in the kind of less political realm, whether we can try and start forming support networks that can outlast any individual organization, whether we, encouraging service users to get support from multiple organizations and to have support from friends and family, and ultimately to try and build up skills to be able to support themselves. I think should be the ultimate aim of all of these kind of organizations, partly because I think having that kind of independence is just good for people in general, but also because it means that when these things happen, people are less out on a limb. And then I think actually what the last year with lockdowns has taught us is that there are some IT solutions to this that hadn't necessarily occurred to a lot of organizations before. That groups can go on to Zoom if they need to, and that there are ways of communicating that can be improved with this kind of technology. One of the real difficulties I think we had was actually it was quite difficult just to get information out to the membership, and looking at ways we can have better communication with technology, I think is something that needs looking at. And again, there might be some academics in the room who can look at some best practice kind of stuff for online services and communication and that kind of thing. And that kind of brings me to the end of what I have to say. That's kind of what happened and how it affected us, and maybe some lessons that we can learn from that. So I'll hand back to whoever's going next.
Hi, thank you so much, Samuel. We are now going to be hearing from our third and I believe our final speaker for this session, which is Liz Rotherham, and her title is Building Resilience. So is Liz with us, and can you turn on your camera?
Yeah, hi Camise, my camera's on and hopefully everyone can hear me.
I will turn it over to you then. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Camise. So hello everybody. I'm going to give you a bit of my personal story and how I built resilience, because I'm sure everyone knows what resilience is, ability to cope challenges, and especially with what's happened in the last year, it's been a massive challenge. So I was diagnosed with bipolar back in 2003, and it all started from the age of 6. So I had something very traumatic happen to me at the age of 6, and then the mask went up. So people saw a happy child all the way through my teenage years, right up to the age I was 32. There was a lot of trauma, physical, mental abuse, and I suppressed it all and put up a mask, so no one actually knew what was going on in my mind, and they saw a happy person. And then in 2002, I went into a massive clinical depression, and something that I'd never experienced before, and I wouldn't even want to put my worst enemies through, because it was like a black cloak had been put over my head, and I had no thought or the ability or anything. I was put on Prozac, and then the following year I had a massive psychotic episode, to the point I believed I was Jesus' sister and had the power to stop a train, and I'd lost complete rationalisation of the brain. And thankfully for me, my boss spotted the signs and symptoms and actually took me to, my parents came to pick me up, and they took me to the doctors, who then took me to a mental hospital. So I was sectioned, which I thank, I'm very blessed that I was, because I would have actually, not wanting to take my own life, but because I thought I had special powers in order to do it. So I was sectioned for a month under the Mental Health Act, and I was diagnosed with bipolar, because I'd gone through the depression and actually had the psychosis as well. Being in hospital for a month, I was medicated up to the eyeballs, because I was so high, to the point of state of euphoria, they didn't actually know what else to do. So I was actually discharged from the hospital and went into a massive depression. Whether it was the amount of medication, not sure, but I then went into depression for 11 months. So I was in denial about the bipolar, because if you think back in 2003, it wasn't talked about as much as it is today, and there's a lot of stigma, a lot of judgment. So I carried on doing what I do, drinking, not really taking my medication, and had 4 psychotic, in the subsequent years, psychotic episodes, so ended up being sectioned again. And then after that, I thought to myself, Liz, what are you doing? I've had my CBT, I've had counselling, you name it, I've had as much therapy as possible, but I thought to myself, I need to really change my lifestyle. So it's all about, building resilience and having the ability to bounce back. And my life has been a roller coaster. So I started to look at holistic therapy, went into mindfulness meditation, hypnotherapy, looking at different ways and understanding my diagnosis, because I'm very, very interested in the mind, and for the last 18 years have been studying it. The power of the mind, as they say, we only use a small percentage. Well, believe me, I've probably used more than that in my psychotic episodes. I've had probably about 10 psychotic episodes and have been sectioned all those times, but they've all been very different. A state of paranoia, euphoria, seeing aliens and things like that. It's sad. Psychosis is one of these things that there's a lot of lack of education out there. And this is why it's good that there's a lot of research, and I work with universities and things like that in order to help people understand psychosis, and this is what I experienced mainly. But what I do find is, with psychosis, when you are sectioned, medication seems like the only option at the moment. However, what I did, medication helps, but I also looked at therapy outside of that, and to understand it. So I knew where my depression had come from, because it was years of suppression, years of trauma and things like that. So I knew whether because it was like a breakdown, years of suppression, and then the crying came like Hoover Dam had broken its barriers. So I knew where that had come from. However, I didn't understand the psychosis, so it was investigating the psychosis. Now, this is my belief. There's a lot of reasons out there what people talk about psychosis, but I've looked into mental health and spirituality. How, if we're living in a very Western world, if I was somewhere else, it might be looked at differently. So it's very, very interesting. But now what I've done is, with the psychosis especially, I know what my triggers are. So sleep's very important, not to get too stressed as well. So I know what my triggers are, and also what my coping mechanisms are. So you know, self-care is so important, and looking after myself, making sure that I eat well, you know, sleep well, doing a lot of mindfulness, meditation, and calming the mind. You know, I find that very beneficial. We do have a lot of overwhelming thoughts, you know, and it's about calming the mind, and I find that very beneficial to myself. But also believing in myself, you know, being the person, speaking your truth. It's taken me a long time to speak out about my diagnosis of bipolar. As I said, there's been a lot of stigma, judgment. I haven't, you know, I've lost friends, I've lost jobs because of it, and haven't got jobs because of it. And now what I do is I try and help as many organisations. I work with the Essex Police, I work with the NHS, I'm an NHS governor, and I work with universities, I work with schools, in order to give people hope and inspiration. Because a lot of people in the past looked at me as bipolar, my diagnosis, rather than me as a human being. And that frustrates me. It frustrates me because, you know, we're all unique. As I say when I deliver my training, we are all unique, and what works for one person might not necessarily work for another. I understand my mind totally now because I've done a lot of research and I've worked with a lot of psychiatrists, different therapists to understand it, which have been very beneficial. So I've done, as I said, done a lot of things to sort of understand my mind, but that's my own opinion. But I do, you know, I'm a firm believer that if we reach out to our younger generation, especially children, we could actually potentially stop a mental health condition manifesting further. Because I mentor children at the moment. I work with other charities. I'm all about collaboration, you know, all about making a difference in this world. Because I firmly believe that if you get the right kind of support and therapy, you can and will get through it. I'm a very firm believer that you can, if you set your mind to it, achieve anything in this world. And it's all about, you know, building resilience, knowing what works for you. As I said, we are all unique. Not everything, you know, if I said to someone, you know, a signpost you here, or you can try this, it might not work for you. You know, some people like art therapy, the creative, things like that. I know what works well for me, and I've tried it. And you know, I'm at the point where if I do find that I'm getting a little bit, the thoughts are coming in, I know how to deal with it because I know what my triggers are, and I know what my coping mechanisms in order to help relax me. You know, which is great. So it's all about working together, especially with you know, the conference. It's about research and finding out, speaking to people that got lived experience. It's crucial because we understand it. You know, we know what we're going through, and that's how we actually help make a difference in order to provide information and what works well for someone. You know, to help universities, to help people in the future, so we can live happy lives. You know, the stigma and judgment, I think that's one of the biggest things currently in our world, why people talk out, because they're so worried about, you know, if they do say how they feel, that they're not normal or that they're different. But believe me, once I started talking out and sharing how I feel, I wrote a book last year actually, and I'm not trying to plug it, don't worry, because it all goes to charity, but I wrote a book last year and it was called Life as a Roller Coaster. And believe me, my life has been a roller coaster. However, I didn't just do it from talking about myself. I did it from my family's point of view, my niece's point of view, my boss at work point of view, my partner, because I think really important, because it's not only the person who's got the diagnosis that goes through it, it's also the people that look after them, it's the family, the friends, and everything like that. So it's so crucial. And I did it because I wanted to offer and offer hope, inspiration to other people, that no matter what if you get a diagnosis or what we go through, you can, with the right kind of support from the right, you know, doctors, psychiatrists, therapy, you know, live like a normal or manage your condition, I suppose. So I'm hoping everyone can hear me still, because I think the screen's frozen, so I'm not sure. Can someone tell me whether you can still hear me?
We can still hear you.
I hear you.
That's all right. I just wondered, because the screen's frozen, so I didn't want to carry on, you know. So yeah, I just think, you know, part of the resilience that I have built is also having a very, very supportive network. You know, I've got some great family and friends, and to be honest with you, if it wasn't for my family and friends, I wouldn't be here today. Because, you know, when I went through my depression, my mum used to come to me every single night, and she used to encourage and say, you will get better. And I just used to look at her, and you know, I didn't even think I would be here talking to you now, you know, because I just had no thought. It's the most, if no one's experienced clinical depression before, when someone you hear, oh, you pull your socks up and things like that, believe me, you cannot. It's only with the help of encouragement from other people, you know, CBT and things like that, cognitive behavior therapy, and, you know, counseling, that really, really helps get you through it as well. You know, it's all about looking after yourself. When I do my mental health first aid training, because I'm an instructor, it's just great, because, you know, people learning about mental health, so crucial, because we all have mental health. And the reason I say that is because we all have minds. All of us have minds. We have emotions, behaviors, feelings. It's just the word mental, there's a lot of stigma behind, and people don't think it applies up to you, but it does. I'm seeing if there's a, sorry. So it does apply to you. So it's about reducing that stigma and discrimination, so we can encourage people to talk out and realise then that they're not alone. Believing yourself, believing, you know, my nickname is Tigger. Okay, because I have a lot of positive energy. And people say to me, when I tell them that I've got bipolar, they go, really? And I go, yeah, but it's, do you know what? I wouldn't actually change anything that I've been through, because the reason being, it's made me the person I am today. It's allowing me to help people. And as I said, I run a charity, and I'm supporting and helping people, because I can see there's so many people going through trauma or living in the past and not dealing with it, not getting the right kind of therapy that can really help you. There's no point worrying about the future, because we didn't even know COVID was going to hit. So, you know, it's things out of our control. Let's do things what we can control. Let's stay in the present moment, enjoy the present moment. That is why mindfulness and meditation is so important. And, you know, I teach it, and when people say to me, I can't meditate, I can't, you know, but you can, because it's all about practice. And I turn around to people and say, well, you learned to ride a bike, you learned to drive a car. So did you ever think that you could do that when you first started it? Probably not. But it takes practice, and it takes practice to calm your mind as well. They asked me today, they said, oh my goodness, Liz, you do so much. There's this going on, this going on. Your mind must be full of all the thoughts. I said, no, it's not. It is actually really calm, because I've learned the ability in order to how to calm it down. And it's all about the power of the mind. It is so powerful. And I'm sure all the psychiatrists and people that are listening realise how powerful. And once you do learn how to work it out and things like that, it's actually incredible how it works. I'm trying to think what else I do to help. You know, set yourself goals. It's all about resilience. Set yourself goals, and, you know, what's your life purpose and things like that. I practice gratitude every single day. I'm grateful for what I have, what I've got, you know, to the point where I'm actually thank you for the fact and it might sound cheesy, the fact I've woken up. You know, we've experienced a lot of bereavement in the last year, and it's been very emotional, and it's been extremely upsetting. But yeah, I actually practice it every single day. You know, I go out for walks. I wouldn't do a marathon or anything like that, you know, because that's not me. But other people love it, you know, running. But I walk my dogs. It's great for that. You know, it's all about finding things that make you happy and that you enjoy, coping mechanisms. So your stress container, or whatever's in your little bucket, it doesn't become overloaded to the point where it actually snaps, which is called emotional snapping as well. Because that's what happened to me when I was 32, and it was years of suppression. So part of the building resilience is talking about it, because talking to people and people actually listening, actually really actively listening, really makes a difference, and it really helps people, especially children as well. The other thing is to take action. You know, we talk the talk quite a bit. Oh, yeah, I must do that. I need to do that. But then something else happens and we get distracted and we don't ever do it. So it's take action, you know, make yourself a plan, have a little toolkit that works for you, which has worked for me, and take action, because it really, really, really does make a difference. So yeah, as I said, you know, it's all about building resilience, but it's building resilience that works for you. Because as I said, we are all extremely unique and we're all different. So it should be about acceptance as well. And let's end the stigma and judgment that people, you know, they do look at. Because to be honest with you, you don't know what's actually going on in that person's life. You don't, when you see, I remember once, this was probably about 8 years ago, I'd actually just come out of hospital. I'd been discharged. And I went to a petrol station and I was feeling quite sort of elated actually, because I had come out of hospital and quite relieved to a certain degree. And there was a girl I didn't realise, and she was watching me. Anyway, it was one of my friends, and she didn't recognise me. And she turned around to the petrol station. She went, "Oh my goodness, Liz, it's so great to see you." Anyway, I explained what I'd been, and she felt quite guilty actually, because she only told me about 3 months ago that she was looking at me in the petrol station, and she felt so bad because she was being judgmental, saying, "Oh, look at that lady, she's got everything, you know, she's full of life." And then I told her that I'd actually come out of a mental hospital, and she was devastated because she'd made an assumption, a judgment about how my life was, and it was completely not like that. So it just makes you aware, you know, that whatever you see, there might be other underlying things that are going on. So when you see someone, like a lot of people see me, you know, positivity and full of life, there's other things that potentially I don't want to share, because there's things that go on in my life that, to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to put on other people. And I try and encourage and give people hope as well, because we all face challenges, and that's what building resilience is about, is facing challenges but knowing what to do, you know, and taking, oh sorry, have I gone on?
Oh no, I was just going to let you. Yeah, you know, it's really lovely, and I'm really enjoying listening to you. I think I could listen to you all day, honestly. And I really.
Sorry, Camise, I didn't know the time, and I didn't see you pop up on the video, so I do apologise, because I just get carried away.
I do the same thing sometimes. I really appreciate your talk. That was excellent, and
that's all right.
Thank you again to all of our speakers. It's been an amazing day.